Where have all the old DJs gone? You'll find out with today's guest, coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Myrtle Beach Herald. We're visiting with a guest who we've been wanting to get on the show for quite a while, who can give us a little history of Myrtle Beach past, Myrtle Beach present, and really probably give a good feel of Myrtle Beach future. Bill Hennecy. Good morning, Bill.
Well, it's a great place, Greg, and I want to thank you for being so kind as to invite me to be on the show with you. I've been watching you on the mornings, and I've been very envious of you, but I've also found you to be very enlightening, and you ask some very good questions, and your guests have been great.
Well, that's kind. You know, it's so exciting. I think you're a PD native, aren't you, Bill?
Yes, I'm from Marion, South Carolina originally, and grew up there. Originally born over in Mullins, but quickly moved to Marion. Sure. Mullins because there was a hospital there. There was no hospital in Marion back in 1946. Giving away my age here.
Yeah.
I grew up in Marion and graduated from high school there. Went to Florence Darlington Tech. Spent some time here at the beach over the years. Was involved in the U.S. Coast Guard. Came back and got involved with Grand Strand Broadcasting in 1970 and been here ever since.
I think I saw that you were an on-air personality as long ago as 1962.
Well, I was 15 years old around the time I got started in the business with a fellow named Ray Summers, who worked at WPOP in Hartford, Connecticut. He came down and bought the radio station in Marion. In Hartford, Connecticut, he was known as the Tune Tycoon, and listeners remember him from the Top 40 days. He hosted many of the concerts during that period of time. But he allowed me to be on the air on a Monday afternoon from 3 until 5 o'clock, daytime only station, playing oldies of all things. Of course, I was biting at the bit to be able to play contemporary music, but he taught me a lot about the big records with the little holes, the 33s, many of the standards of the day we had to play after 5 o'clock. But it was an enjoyable time. Did high school football in Marion on the radio, and always wanted to be in Myrtle Beach because I felt like it was the most progressive and aggressive community in South Carolina.
Well, two interesting questions from that. What brought him down from Hartford, Connecticut to Marion, South Carolina? And what enabled...
Much like all entrepreneurs, just like yourself, he wanted to own a radio station. And he saved up his money, and his uncle helped finance him. And he came down to Marion. He actually did a great deal in contributing to the community. Did a man-on-the-street interview on the radio every afternoon at 3 o'clock, and did the high school football games and was very involved in the community. Later, he went back to Hartford, Connecticut, and was involved in subscription TV, and he ended up at WHYZ up in Greenville, South Carolina.
The excitement for you at age 16 to be able to get on air. You'd have friends in high school you'd bump into and...
I went to high school with them every day.
Yeah,
the most exciting part was we did a show, which has since been made into a piece of artwork at the location by the Marion County Downtown Commission, and that was the old Darriette show, which was out on Highway 76. And it was a drive-in eatery, and Billy Smith hosted the show for a while and several other people, but I got to host the show for like 3 years, and this was when I was still in high school, so we played records, and we had skydivers come in, and Miss South Carolina, and Junior Miss South Carolina, and the folks would be lined up in both directions waiting to come into this drive-in restaurant so that they could request a song. And I learned so many people's names and was introduced to people from all over the PD who would come over on Sunday afternoon. And then I would get a phone call from their parents wanting to know that if they were riding around and were they okay and was everybody safe. It's amazing how many teenage girls, their mothers check up on them frequently during the 60s.
I bet. So starting in 1962 and then obviously migrating to Myrtle Beach in, was it the early 70s?
No, and actually in 1965 I came down here and worked weekends on what was then the brand new WTGR, Tiger Radio 1520. So what I would do is I'd work every day in Marion from 3 to 5. Friday night I would do the high school football game. Saturday morning I would do a shift at WATP in Marion, drive down here, be on the air at 1 o'clock, they'll sign off. It's a daytime only station. Up Sunday morning, do the morning show on Sunday till noon, drive back to Marion and do the Darriette show starting at 3 o'clock until 6.
You are kidding, Bill.
I was having a great time. Had plenty of money, had nice looking clothes, and it was wonderful.
Well, that must be. Now, are there still folks like that in radio now? Are there folks who are able to work multiple stations or travel around, traveling from
Tom
community?
Joyner, the morning show guy, who was on one of the local stations here, used to be called the Flyman. And he would fly from Chicago to Dallas, Texas. He would do Chicago in the morning, midday he would be on the way to Dallas, work Dallas in the afternoon, and fly back the other direction in the evening to start all over again the next day.
So you were a microcosm of a much larger audience like Tom Joyner in the morning.
Well, you must remember that Banana Jack is doing a dual duty here in town by both being here on Channel 43 with you and also doing mornings at Wave 104.
That's exactly right. And he also is real involved in Tiger Radio Online, I think.
Oh, yeah. He's got, and the Cyber Patriot, which is another one of his .com. You can visit and get his opinion on today's world.
That's cyberpatriot.com. I don't think I knew that.
Well, we're giving him a little exposure.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll get a bunch of hits this afternoon.
Pump up Banana Jack. That's great. That's great. Bill, what about that experience of being on? I mean, going back to 1962, but fast forwarding to, let's say, the early 70s, arriving. When did WKZQ kick off, and when did you end up there?
Well, WTGR signed on the air in 1965. In 1973, it was WTGR-FM. We changed the call letters by writing the call letters on a napkin down at the Holiday Inn downtown and coming up with WKZQ. In 1973, in the month of July, is when it first came on the air. When you talk about 60s radio, one of the ironies of it all was I used to listen to Dick Biondi in Chicago, WLS, Clear Channel 89. Little did I realize that I would be his competition in Myrtle Beach, because Dick Biondi came down here and took a respite from big city radio and worked at WNNB in North Myrtle Beach with Bill Norman. And he stayed down here for about 5 years, loved to play golf, and ended up going back to Chicago. And that was rather interesting. That was a highlight, having the #1 top 40 jock in America to be in this community.
Wow, yeah. Does he get back at all? Is he still living?
I think he still plays a little golf occasionally, but he works at WFYR, Fire Radio, which plays oldies in Chicago these days.
That's amazing. Now, when you of course, you probably a heck of a lot of folks, on-air personalities, worked for you over the years and have traveled around to other markets. Do you keep up with many of the folks that went on from Myrtle Beach into other markets?
Well, Greg Fowler, who was my program director, is the public relations person for Alabama and has been with them since 1981. Chris William, who was on the Air Force Base here, is in Charlotte after working at WROQ, and he also hosts Carolina Business People on ETV. He's a real estate stockbroker with Interstate Johnson Lane in Charlotte. Shotgun Jeff Stone, whose real name was Milan Stoyanovich, is working at Sirius Satellite Radio afternoons in New York on Channel 1 as a top 40 jock. He also worked in L.A. and worked in Miami. And, I keep up with them. It's rather interesting what they do. Pat Patterson, who used to drive a funky green Jeep and give out T-shirts and suntan oil in the summer of 1979. Pat eventually hosted Race Day on TNN, negotiated the contracts for the Busch Grand National Series and NASCAR with TNN, produced the Winter Heat Series out in Phoenix, Arizona, and I still do races with him at Irwindale Speedway on Fox Sports Southwest. He just renewed the contract this year.
Is that right, Bill?
Yeah.
How often do you travel out to Irwindale?
About 2 times a year, because they're post-produced through the magic of electronic media here in Myrtle Beach.
Oh, come on.
Oh, yeah. Out at Waccamaw Media and Bob Scarborough, who is another person who was a beach monkey down on the ocean front, because his folks had a house down at about 4th Avenue North, and Bob listened to the radio, rode his bicycle out to WKZQ and asked for a part-time job. And so through his high school years, he worked at WKZQ and would come down here on the weekends from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, just to pull an airship. But that's the way it was in the 60s and the 70s. You had this affinity for broadcasting. All you wanted to do was have the guy who was sitting in the seat behind the microphone say, gee, I'd like to have a hamburger or something. And you say, hey, why don't you go get it, and I'll be on the air for the next 5 minutes for you.
Wow.
In Marion, it was leave the studio and go to E.B. Bridges Drugstore across the street. They had a lunch counter there. And many afternoons, I couldn't wait till Billy Smith left to go across the street, because then I would segue 3 or 4 records while he was on break.
That is hilarious. Now, when we talk about Billy Smith, you mean the same Billy Smith who's still
the legendary Billy Smith
at 94.9 now?
He's on the Surf.
On the Surf, that's right. And that of course is an example of some folks that have remained in the community, have stayed on in a
Billy
local ownership.
came here in 1965 when Tiger Radio first signed on the air, and he left for a respite to go to Charleston, South Carolina, and Wilmington, North Carolina, and then he worked at WNMB for over the years, and then, of course, he switched around to Cool, and now he's at the Surf.
That's so exciting. See, we had a guest about a month ago, Bill, who's been a manager at stations for a long time, and now is on air, is Scott Richards.
Oh, yeah?
And Matt Sedota was with us, golly, about a month ago, and it was exciting hearing him talk about growing up. His dad had been an on-air personality,
Right.
and that excitement for him making the transition into actually being on air himself. There's something about it. What's so thrilling about it? I mean,
Well, I always wanted to do it when I was a little boy. I used to listen to WJAY, which was called Marion and Mullins' broadcasting company. They were located on a little fill area between Marion and Mullins known as Jaybird Island. Well, there was a guy named Barney Marshall, and Barney eventually went into the Air Force, and I understand retired as a major. He'd be an old guy now. But as a kid, I used to listen to him, and he made radio exciting. He made things exciting in Marion. First remote I ever went to was for American Wood Products in Marion, and they had a remote in a sawdust-covered building for kind of like promoting industry in Marion. And it was super. And they had a monkey there. And, of course, that enticed me. And, man, broadcasters have monkeys and all these things, and it was, like, wonderful.
oh, wow. That is amazing. The excitement, of course, to seeing the progression of broadcasting on the Strand, to see the radio broadcasting change over the years.
Well, the most interesting thing, Greg, is the fact that Myrtle Beach changed so very much. On the way from Marion down here, you would pass WLAT on the left-hand side of the road on 501. Jack Hawley, I saw him just a few nights ago, and Jack Hawley and his dad owned that radio station for a number of years. They were the first station with a real FM license in the community, at 25,000 watts, and I think about a 250-foot stick, and had a fabulous control room over there, custom-made board, and I used to stop by and drool over their equipment. And then you came down to Myrtle Beach, and you had WMYB AM, and then they put the FM on the air. In 1969, Tom Rogers, who was working for his father-in-law, John Soules, and Mr. Isidore Kramer, who owned a men's store over in Whiteville, who actually owned Tiger Radio, put WTGR FM on the air. And then in 1973, when he bought the station, he at that time let us change the format and become a little bit more progressive. We were one of the first live 24-hour stations on the FM band in South Carolina, and basically a seasonal resort.
24-hour, live, year-round,
Oh, yeah. It's
right
fun.
here. The first one in South Carolina.
Probably the first one in this area. I
Right.
wouldn't say South Carolina. The first one in this area.
Sure. And of course, as you say, in a resort community. Let's talk about some of the changes in Myrtle over those years on air.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Myrtle Beach, and I'll tell you a little about the on-air, too. In 1951, and coming down here and being primarily 5 years old, Myrtle Beach had all the potential in the world. Basically, a lot of cottages on the ocean front. The boulevard ended at 3rd Avenue South. It made a right-hand turn. It crossed a bridge, which is now through the present amusement park, and went across to Yaw Pond Drive. There was no South Ocean Boulevard. There was very little business on Highway 17 once you got out of the heart of Myrtle Beach by the Chapin Company. You drove north, and as you drove north, there was a place called Lloyd's Restaurant on the right-hand side, right there at about 12th Avenue, where the Wings is, across from Chapin Park. A couple of motels, and as you ventured further north, you ended up going by the old El Rancho Motel up by 38th Avenue North, and then a little bit further, you got up in front of an old Northside Pharmacy, and there was an Italian restaurant there and a service station. And then from there up to Restaurant Row, where the Hidden Village is, that was about it. Then you went to Windy Hill, could drive all the way up to Little River, and of course, during the season, they would have burlap sacks on the ground, and big piles of shrimp that had just been brought in. And, you start thinking about all these things and how much Myrtle Beach has changed and how much has grown. One of the first signs you used to see in Myrtle Beach when you drove in was the old Piggly Wiggly sign right there at Broadway and 501, and you knew you had arrived here. It's just interesting that so much goes through transition in this community. For instance, nobody ever notices this, and I started looking at it in 1970. If you take a look at Highway 17 South from the old Chapin Company to the entrance of the air base, it's constantly changing. Since probably 75, last 29 years, there was only one business that maintained its original name since the late 60s. And it burned last year. And that was the Chuck Wagon Restaurant. It was the very last business on Highway 17 South that bore its same name for more than 25 years.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Everything's constantly changing down here. New people are coming in.
Yeah, I think about Jay Edwards. That's been there a good while, hasn't it?
Jay Edwards has been there for a while. It used to be Western Sizzlin'. And he operated that business for a long period of time. And then, of course, he changed and made a transition into Jay Edwards. Ed Fleming has a great place.
Ed Fleming sure does. I was at Villa Romana recently, and I think Ronaldo was saying that it used to be a used to be a steakhouse.
Well, if you head south on Highway 17, once again, and we're venturing down, that was a Bonanza Steakhouse, no, Ponderosa Steakhouse right there where El Cerro Grande is. And yes, there was a steakhouse a little bit further down the road. And if you went north on Highway 17, where the Spring House is, that was the Bonanza restaurant in 1966.
Golly, that is
It all changes, and there was a drive-in restaurant across the street known as the Hickory House, where all the teenagers hung out back in the 60s. And the area around the pavilion has just greatly changed. The Methodist Church is the same. It's been there forever. But across the street, there was a place called Gene's Drive-In. And next to it, where the pavilion parking garage is, was a place called the Donut Diner that existed. Across the street from that, where the amusement park is, was the Lafayette Hotel here in town. And at one time in 51, all of the area of the pavilion was all sand. And they had temporary amusement rides that moved out and came back in, kind of like a carnival.
You've got a vivid memory, Bill.
Well, if I tell you one other story here that you might appreciate being in the broadcast business. In 1951, I went down to the Myrtle Beach Pavilion, and Arthur Smith and the Cracker Jacks were performing in a live show. They had live shows there every night. And I heard a song, and it stayed with me forever. Well, I'm in a movie watching the movie Deliverance. And I hear the song, and I go, I've heard that song before. And I kept pondering, where did I hear the song? Where did I hear the song? And it was written by two guys, and it was called Dueling Banjos. Tim Weisberg and another guy. Well, about 2 months later, Arthur Smith sued Weisberg and Warner Brothers Records for copyright infringement. The song was originally called Dueling Guitars.
No.
He won the case because he wrote the song, and they had thought it was in public domain as a traditional mountain ballad, which I thought was rather interesting. The fact that, when you're 5 or 6 years old, you hear the song, how long it stays with you. I said, gee, I've heard that song before.
And when you go into a sound booth or you go into a booth where there are multiple records around, are you hearing a song from virtually every record in front of you? Is there
not
something?
Really. I used to keep up with all that. I used to tell you what every song was on every little label, and kept up with it over the years. And things change. We're no longer in the 33, 45 RPM mode now.
Yeah.
We're into MP3, and I can't keep up with that.
You're right. You were just talking about Sirius, one of the guys who...
Records don't have persona now these days. They don't have a label.
That's a very good point. There's not something that'll melt, or I guess something could, but it's not as fearful as it would be in another setting.
That's for sure.
That's incredible, Bill. Well, the excitement for you, of course, having stayed in the area, do you still get to Marion at all?
My brother passed away back in January. He was a lifelong resident of Marion. He loved the place. My dad loved Marion. He was Citizen of the Year back in probably 1981. He got involved with the founding of Marco Water Company over there and set the very first power pole for the old Marion Electric Co-op back in 1939, and he was heavily involved in that over the years. But my dad loved Marion. There was no other place other than Marion. He was the fire chief. He was all those things that you think about, the epitome of a man in a small town. He just loved the community.
We had my attorney originally, when I was coming down to buy the station and finding a tower location there, our tower's between Mullins and Nichols, Charlie Speth, who'd been an attorney there in Marion for so many years, and hearing his kids, Pat and Ted, talk about their dad growing up in Marion and the excitement there. And, of course, the guy that he hooked us up with, Galt Beeson.
Oh, Galt was the Marion County Development Director and took care of everything. And he also taught a Sunday school class at Uncle Charlie's Hut behind the Methodist Church, which was aired on the radio every Sunday morning for as long as I can remember.
You're kidding.
And his son, Bunny Beeson, is involved in conservation in Marion County.
That's right. Still does quite a bit right off of the river there. Has a big presence here. Well, it's amazing. Of course, the commitment, the ability to utilize radio to get out to a community on a constant basis. And of course, TV has that same and even in a little different way. But radio, having gone back so much further, and the excitement in a community for you to be able to transcend really into multiple communities.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Broadcasting as a whole, for you and I, we all hold something that we cannot see tangibly. Mm-hmm. And I used to call them the invisible keys. Mm. The invisible keys will open all kinds of doors in the community. They will open doors in other communities for you if you're involved in broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And those invisible keys have worked for me, for the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Bill, you all had a great local owner here. I think it was Tom Rogers, who you were with for a heck of a long time. You all were partnered up at some level, or you worked with him?
Tom let me work for him from 1966 until we sold the station in 1997. I was actually predated Tom at the station. He was an engineer from over at Tabor City, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. So more than
Tom
3 decades.
graduated from Wake Forest,
right.
And DeVry Technical Institute, and he was really into ham radio and building things by hand. And he loved the electronic side of it. There was a new gadget to be had in the late 60s and early 70s. Tom Rogers had it. The first handheld calculator anyone had was Tom Rogers had it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Golly, Bill, one other thing I was thinking about, of course, not to segue off of Tom there, although that's a good one. I think I saw your picture recently on the wall in the chamber conference room.
Well, one thing we tried to do at Grand Strand Broadcasting was become involved in the community. And allowing us to be involved, we felt like we had to contribute to the community. Tom served as the chairman of the chamber on 2 different occasions. I was fortunate enough to be chairman of Sun Fund for 3 different years back in the late 70s, early 80s. I was fortunate enough to be the chairman of the chamber back in 1981. And I really enjoyed those days. I enjoyed working with the people of Myrtle Beach. Because at that time we all had a vision of where we've arrived today. We still haven't gotten to the plateau that we want to be. But you think about the fact that we now have population moving into the area. It is dynamic, and it is growing.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Tom, his wife Suzette has also been real active.
Right. She was a chairman of the chamber also on 2 occasions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think always real involved with Sun Fund. Probably got involved when you were involved.
Well, she came right about the end of the period of time that I was heavily involved in that. Mm-hmm. But it's always been a lot of fun. Myrtle Beach is a fun town if you will take advantage of the fun opportunities that are provided.
When you travel out to Irwindale a couple times a year, out to California, you travel to other parts of the country, what is it about Myrtle Beach that keeps pulling you back?
I guess I always saw something in Myrtle Beach that I never saw anyplace else. Myrtle Beach is a place where everybody wants to come to. Maybe they don't want to live here, but they certainly want to venture here and see what we have. Once again, it's a very progressive and aggressive community. Irwindale Speedway in California is a super facility. Daytona International Speedway is a super facility. I've gotten to meet a lot of folks over the years, Paul Newman and a lot of names in showbiz, Dick Clark and all those folks. But Myrtle Beach, I feel very comfortable here. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't like some of the directions it's taking, but overall it's fun. And once again, oftentimes we overlook the one thing that brings everyone here, and that's the beach. Last summer, my son and I went out on his Hobie 16 a number of times. It was the most fun that I've had in 30 years. And it was such a simple thing, but it was very enjoyable. And it got to the point where I was trying to get him to, let's go sail today.
Yeah.
And it was unusual because normally I had not been down to the beach that much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think I saw that you've also gotten active over the years on the publishing side. Just recently reading a little bit about you on...
Well, we started Strand Magazine back in 1986, and Dolores Blunt, who was our sales manager at WKZQ, now runs that operation for us, and we acquired Gateway Publications down in Charleston, South Carolina. But I'm just a partner with Tom Rogers, Jim Creel, another prominent name here in town, and Dolores in the publishing business.
The 4 of y'all put out a Strand Magazine and Strand Rental Guide, and I think more recently Sassy Magazine.
Oh, that's a very popular thing.
Come on strong, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is the one that all the ladies seem to look forward to getting, and it's a little bit different. Maybe you have to have an eclectic taste to enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I like Sassy. That's a good-looking piece. It really is. It comes out, I guess, bi-monthly.
Right.
Which is, it was excited to see your name involved in that. There's a heck of a lot going on, and when you talk about really touching the Strand, it's publications like that or radio shows or involvement either in print or in broadcast that have enabled you to really touch the community.
Well, one of the other things I was involved in was I put together a performance racing network at Charlotte Motor Speedway. And I was heavily involved in that from day one, 1982, until 1991. And I was a talent on the air and everything. But I used to clear all the stations across the United States. And we grew that to about 250 stations, and that was over 15 years ago. It was one of the largest independent sports networks in the country.
And that's a great segue into the next time we get you in, Bill. We've run out of time. But
What?
Myrtle Beach.
All the time is gone?
26 minutes is out.
Gee
That's right.
whiz.
It's amazing how time flies. And, of course, the excitement, of course, recently, the transfer into helping out Myrtle Beach Speedway, coming on as their new promoter and general manager. We hope we can get you back to talk about that.
Well, that's my passion is motorsports, and we didn't talk much about that, but I'm looking forward to coming back and being with you.
The season kicks off this Saturday, April 3rd.
That's right.
Okay, very
I'd like to
exciting.
invite you out.
We'll get out there. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Bill Hennecy coming up next. You heard his vivid memory at age 5 coming down from Marion. Growing up there in Mullins and Marion, the excitement of Marion County to be able to travel down to the beach. The words were simple. Everyone wants to come here. He still speaks those words as he travels around the country now. Everyone wants to come to Myrtle Beach. It's a special place. Bill Hennecy, thanks so much for being with us this morning. Catch him at the Myrtle Beach Speedway this Saturday as the new season kicks off. You can call out there at 236-0500 or go online at myrtlebeachspeedway.com.